All right, welcome to part three, after treatment overview. I guess we'll get right into it so we don't burn a lot of minutes here. So there, part three. Hopefully you've watched part one and part two. Don't try to skip forward so it'll have a basic understanding. So I ended part two talking about the sensors. So I figured we talk about some of the basics. And like I said before in part one, we introduced the after treatment on diesels here in the United States in 2007 and a half, 2007 model year with the diesel oxidation catalyst and with the diesel particulate filter. So with that said, well, let's get into what's going on with some of this stuff. First of all, on the YouTube, you're going to find a free downloadable animation here, and thought I played. Hopefully, it won't get me in trouble. But in this case, what you're going to see here is you got the diesel oxidation catalyst coming down the exhaust. Now, again, this is Audi's version. And by the way, do a search on that. But anyways, diesel oxidation catalyst works with, again, to oxidize the exhaust, meaning carbon mono to carbon dioxide. And then you're going to see the diesel particulate filter. So in this case, there you can see those black dots right there, and that represents the soot. So in this case, again, we're trapping the soot. Again, that's the particulate filter. And then we have the reductant injector injecting the DEF fluid AdBlue. So it's injecting that where it readily converts from DEF fluid, which is 32.5% solution of urea with water, to ammonia, NH3. And then after that, we actually have our NOx reducing catalyst or SER catalyst, as you can see right there. So again, that's pretty much it. So I actually encourage you to do a search on AdBlue and also DEF fluid, and you're going to see a lot of these animations that are out there that'll help you understand what's going on. So with that said, you'll actually have the after treatment. This is where I left off on part two. So in this case, in part three, we're going to talk about pretty much the sensors here, but let's just stick to one at a time here. Let's go after the diesel particulate filter. So number five on this setup here, this is an LML Duramax. So again, this is an LML Duramax, which is about what, 2011 to 2016 model year GM trucks. Again, the LML. There's your diesel particulate filter, and we have some type of differential pressure sensor. Now, in the early LMMs, we showed you this earlier, where we got a tube before, this is your diesel particulate filter also, before and after, and we saw this sensor, delta pressure sensor, also known as our differential pressure sensor. And what he's doing is that sensor is reading the pressure variance between the inlet and the outlet of the diesel particulate filter. So like we just saw in the animation, we saw that the soot's being trapped by the diesel particulate filter, and eventually it's going to get loaded. So with that, how does the computer or onboard electronic control module, better known as the ECM, knows when the particulate filter is getting loaded? Well, one of them is, and quote me here correctly, one of them is the use of the delta pressure sensor or differential pressure sensor. The second is actually your fuel level sensor. You're like, huh? Yeah, your fuel level sensor, aka known as your fuel sending unit, the guy that reads the fluid level in the tank. So in this case, that's that another input there, but that's a separate subject. But in this case, he kind of uses an algorithm. The computer itself uses an algorithm to figure out what is the total fuel consumed, and in turn looks at the loads that the vehicle's been under, and then makes a calculation how much should have been generated. Okay, but for now we're looking at the delta pressure sensor, differential pressure sensor. So we're going to be able to read a soot load on the scan tool. So in this case, the scan tool will tell us what the soot load is, but the computer uses that information and uses, again, an algorithm to figure out the total soot content that is in the particular based on, once again, the differential pressure sensor and fuel consumed from the fuel level sensor. So like we saw earlier in part one and two, there you can see the oxidation catalyst, but again, downstream, like on this Power Stroke 6.7, we could see the diesel particulate filter on the Super Duty truck. Okay, so there it is. So there's got to be, again, a differential pressure sensor that's going to read that pressure variance between the inlet and the outlet. So I know it's welded together as one assembly, the SCR NOx catalyst and the DPF, but we're only reading the differential pressure between the inlet of the DPF, which is somewhere around here, and the outlet. Okay, and that's what we're going to see. So when we look at a Ram Dodge like this 2013 model, there's the downpipe coming to turbo. Again, there is your oxidation catalyst or diesel oxidation catalyst. And then you're going to have what right here? A diesel particulate filter. So this one's different. So in this case, we see that. And then we see your SER injector right there, better known as we just saw it, the reductant injector. And then there's your SER catalyst too. And then your ammonia slip catalyst. Okay. Totally different here. So again, not all diesels are the same. Similar components, but they're not all the same. So that's why I want to show you a Ford, which I just showed you here. And now you could see a 2013 Ram Dodge with a 6.7 Cummins. Okay. So we mentioned also on part two, what is regeneration? So when we get loaded, the particulate filter gets loaded with soot, we got to regenerate it. In other words, clean it out, burn it all out. So there were three types of regeneration: manual, which is the use of a scan tool. Some trucks on the light duty side have the ability for you to run a regeneration, but not all. Therefore, you have to use a scan tool. That would be, again, a manual regeneration. But big Class A trucks do have a button where they can run a regeneration. But then there is active regeneration. What does active mean? Now, again, there are all three types of regeneration here. But active means that the computer itself is going to help the burning of the soot process in the DPF by adding, again, fuel. So like we discussed in part two, there could be a dedicated injector, or we can run post injections. And then, like I mentioned before, also is passive regeneration, that the over-the-road truck that's always loaded is going to be generating enough heat that's going to burn that soot in the exhaust. So again, don't get too upset about this. Regeneration is the process of burning soot. So if the truck is running at optimum levels, it's well maintained, even if you drive the holy heck out of it, as long as it's well maintained, it's got everything's running hunky-dory, then therefore regeneration should be at a minimum because there shouldn't be that much accumulated soot. It should take quite a while. So that's what we talked about. So when I run a regeneration, here you could see an LMM Duramax, which was, I believe, an '08 truck that I was doing here. You can see that us as technicians, we're going to look at our scan tools and we're going to see this total soot mass. And in this case, I see 83 grams right here when I start the regeneration. Here you can see the commanded state is on. DPF service regeneration is on, so therefore I have 83 grams. So a lot of people don't know this, and this is what I teach to technicians in training. They ask me, how do I know it's really loaded? Sometimes it's displayed the soot content in percentage, sometimes it's displayed in grams, and some other metric scales too, depending on the vehicle model. I mean, there's European, there's German diesels out there. So in this case, you got to watch out. In this case, on this General Motors product and other products, we actually measure it in grams. The magic number is 30 grams. So if I have a truck come in and it's over 30 grams of accumulated calculated soot, hear me correctly, accumulated calculated soot in the eyes of the ECM, then therefore he says, hey, yeah, we're pretty loaded. And I could manually run a regeneration with my scan tool. Okay. So in this case, this one was pretty loaded. It had 83 compared to the 30, right? So in this case, we got the exhaust gas temperature sensors. This model only has two temperature sensors, one before the DPF and one after the DPF. So in this case, we can see the temperature inlet and the temperature outlet. So let's go back to our first slide here, or slide before here. Remember, regeneration means to burn the soot from a DPF that is loaded. So should we be running a regeneration all the time? No. If it is, that means something's triggering, that something's generating too much soot. Remember, the diesel particulate filter is just a filter. So if it's got too much soot coming down the pipe, something's going up upstream in that engine that's causing a lot of soot that should not be there. So we're running a regeneration. We just said it's burning of the soot, correct? Well, obviously, we're going to be running a lot of post injections on this model. So there's going to be a lot of fuel coming down that downpipe from the turbo because we ran post injections. So at that point, the temperature is going to be this much coming in. So therefore, maybe I should mention it before, where do regens start? Somewhere above 970 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? 970 degrees Fahrenheit. So at that point, that means we are getting real hot. So where did this heat come from on this first sensor, which is right at the start of the after treatment? Well, that was from post injections and the diesel oxidation catalyst. So when a diesel oxidation catalyst meets fuel, a chemical reaction causes excessive amount of heat. Now, when gasoline goes into a catalytic converter, that's bad. It gets so hellaciously hot, it melts it all down. But on a diesel, we're intentionally putting fuel into that diesel oxidation catalyst to get it really hot. So at that point, it's above 970 degrees, and therefore it's going to cause a regeneration event, as we call it, a regeneration event. So here you can see the temperature coming into the diesel particulate filter from the diesel oxidation catalyst is 1112. But we see the temperature after substantially hotter, 1227 degrees. There you could see the pressure variance that the delta pressure sensor is measuring, or differential pressure is 3.4. So another tool that technicians can use to read or understand where is the state of a diesel particulate filter. You got to understand, I got to look at this every time a truck comes in. Yeah, sure, I got a drivability problem, but I need to know where's the diesel particulate filter at. I'm like, I got to look at the big picture here. Yeah, I got issues, maybe I got to address, but I also got to keep in mind that if I got too much soot accumulation in that diesel particulate filter, we're causing a lot of back pressure, and we're going to have performance problems with the engine. So in this case, we use that differential pressure sensor to read the pressure variance. The number is 3 psi. Okay, uno, dos, tres. So in this case, 1, 2, 3. So if I see that I got 3 psi or greater at idle, but I can raise the RPM with the vehicle in park. So let's say it comes into my stall, I got it all hooked up, I'm reading the scan tool, I'm reading the differential pressure, it's 3 psi or higher. That just tells me that, hey, I need to run a regeneration. But since the truck is running crappy, maybe I got a bad injector, I got turbo issues, intake issues, EGR issues, I got to address that first. But when I'm done repairing and get that engine to run smoothly, then at that point, I'm going to run a regeneration. Okay, so that's part of the service. Like last week, I just did a power stroke 6.7, and after I did the repair, what was wrong with the truck, I actually went ahead and ran a regeneration because it was really high on soot mass according to the scan tool. Okay, so at this point, I see it's 3.4 psi. It's over 3 psi. So at that point, we run in regeneration. That's what I'm doing here. So as we continue with the regeneration, again, this is a later in time after a few, probably 10, 15 minutes of running the regeneration, you can see that the soot mass is already dropping. Remember, we were at 83 grams. Now I'm at 76 grams. Okay. The temperature is still high coming out of there. So that means I'm burning. If it's much substantially warmer after the DPF, that's telling me I'm cooking. That means I'm burning that soot that's inside of that particulate filter. And what's happening is that since I'm burning the soot, look at the pressure. We went from 3.4 to 2.7. So that's telling me that, yeah, we're starting to clean up and burn that particulate matter or soot that's in the DPF. So as we continue working on this truck and let it run its regeneration, this is probably 20, 30 minutes later, 40 minutes later, I'm guessing, we see that the grams are dropping, the temperature is still warm after the catalyst, after the DPF, and we see the pressure continue to drop. And eventually, you're going to see here on the right that I got 9 grams, okay? And again, it's still warmer after the DPF, and you could see the pressures drop substantially. So remember, we were at 3.4 psi, but after the end of the whole regeneration process, we were almost under 1.5 psi. So therefore, I had a successful regeneration here. And I wasn't finished. I didn't even take the final picture of the final event. But in this case, this all took about average regeneration, somewhere between 40 minutes to an hour. If it's less, that's because it burned off quickly. So therefore, but a good regeneration usually takes about 40 minutes to an hour. So there you go. So that's how we run a regeneration when we do it. And we basically, and that's one thing if you're an owner of a vehicle, you want to get that regeneration, you want to check that data to see what's going on. So which brings up to the most touchy subject. As I look at forums on Facebook, like I belong to the 6.0, 6.4, 6.7, and other, I see poor souls trying to figure out what's problem with their truck. And hey, I got a crank no start. Oh, I got this going on, or check engine light. I got all these warning lights on. But you got to have a scan tool. And that's the biggest challenge for a lot of you, is because you don't have access to a scan tool. So please note, if you really want to get into your truck and you really want to know, you want to get somewhat of a decent scan tool. You can comment on me later. I can recommend certain ones that might be a good idea for you to get. Maybe you're spending under $1,000 for one, but You're going to have one because that's the tool. That's what I tell technicians today is you need a laptop for service information, and you also need, a scan tool to invest. Those tools are just as important, as I tell technicians, as your quarter-inch drive ratchet, your 10 millimeter socket, and your impact air guns, your pliers, and so on. In other words, the scan tool is just as important as your regular hand tools. It's just a modern day scan tool. So therefore, to conclude, we see that the DPF, again, is going to read 30 grams or more, right? So if it's 30 grams or more, yeah, it's going to try to run a regeneration. And the differential pressure, like we said, should not be no greater than 3 psi. And this is pretty much for most of the diesels that I deal with, okay? Definitely for most of the diesels I deal with. Now here I'm showing a recordings of a Ford 6.7, and you can see as it's running its regeneration right there, you're going to see it's got 4 temperature sensors because this one has SER, in other words, the DEF fluid. And in this case, we see your temperature at 671 at 11, 12, 13, as it goes downstream, and you can see that we're somewhere around 1,031 degrees coming out of the DPF. Now let me freeze this for a second. This sensor right here is after the DPF, diesel particulate filter, because on the 6.7, the last component on a Super Duty truck is the diesel particulate filter. So this is before the diesel particulate filter, and this is after. You will notice that it's substantially cooler. Yes, I know it's over 1,000 degrees, but look, 1,100 degrees, 1,031 degrees. Okay, so in this case, excuse me, 1,112 degrees, 1,031 degrees. That means there's no more cooking. It's cooler. Nothing's burning in that diesel particulate filter. So therefore, that tells me it's clean. So we can see that as I continued running, let me backtrack here. We started off at 47%, but then we're finishing it off at what? 6%. That's what we're looking at there. Okay. So that's what a regeneration is all about. So there are some amateur guys that read the wrong information on the internet, and they are literally buying these tuners that I don't know why they put the ability to run a regeneration. Well, it's only good for those that know. So therefore, should you be running a regeneration every day? Because I've had customers, I kid you not, I've had customers I had to slap them and tell them, yeah, every time I come home, I run a regeneration. You're eventually going to burn. In other words, it's too much heat. You're going to burn off pretty much the precious metals that are in these catalysts. No, you shouldn't be running. And for the most part, the truck should not be doing a regen because I get customers that come in and tell me, well, my truck's been running regenerations. And I'm like, how do you know? And they're like, well, is there a warning light that comes on? No, the only thing that could tell you that it's probably running a regeneration is that it might give you a message on the dash that says drive to clean. Okay, drive to clean or maintain something that says drive to clean, cleaning catalyst, or something that says about cleaning the catalyst. Yeah, at that point, you can say that it is running a regeneration. But I got to tell you, in the next presentation, we're going to talk about SER, and we're going to talk more about the sensors too. Don't think I haven't forgotten, but I can only teach so much at a time. But what we're going to mention is that, if you're running a lot of regenerations, remember, you got a problem. Sidebar on that. Now, can there be a problem where you're running or it's being full that you got some kind of activity going on? Let me give you an example because there's a lot to cover here. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. Sorry. Is I can run a regeneration on the truck, and as soon as I run the regeneration, oh my God, you get all this billowing brown smoke. I mean, it's fumigating the whole parking lot. I mean, intense smoke coming out. And you're like, what it is that there's something in that particulate filter that's poisoned. So, you got to understand, and that's where I have to ask the customer. I go, hold on a second. If we get a lot of white smoke, that's usually diesel fuel. Okay. Unburnt diesel fuel is white in color. But if it's brownish, blackish crap that's coming out of that exhaust while I'm running a regeneration there in the stall manually with the scan tool, that tells me we probably got something that should not be there. In other words, mostly sulfur and heavy phosphorus based compounds, meaning that there is some not approved fuel additive or non approved oil additive. The problem is when you go to your local auto parts, I sympathize with you do it yourselfers because you're like, well, what the hell kind of additive is best for me to use? Just because some race car driver all of a sudden knows everything about it and he could recommend this additive for you doesn't make him an expert. So in this case, you got to be careful of the additives you want to get. You can comment me and send me a message if you want about what's the best additive. And yes, there are proven additives, and in this case, you can use them. But the problem is with such other additives that are no good, should not have a lot of sulfur content or phosphorus-based compounds. So in this case, watch out. So the question I have to ask my customers are you pouring something into the fuel? Are you pouring something into the oil when you change the oil? And that could affect that black smoke that I might be getting that's pretty much poisoning the diesel particulate filter. So with that said, they'll admit, oh, I'm buying Jet A, Jet B fuel, mixing it with two-stroke oil in my fuel. I'm running this exotic additive that I saw this guy use, or I'm pouring transmission fluid into the fuel. Oh my God, that's a big no-no too. So with that said, we got to make sure we're not dealing with a poison DPF that can also cause regeneration issues. All right. So with that said, hopefully you've learned a little bit of particulate filters. Wait till the next presentation. Yes, we got more to talk about. Hopefully it's helping you out and explaining things more thoroughly. Until then, subscribe if you like this. If not, give me a comment, say hello, say how are you, ask any questions you would like. I'd be more than happy to answer. So with that, have a nice evening or have a nice day or afternoon. Or those of you guys that do this video watching when you can't sleep, I sympathize because I do the same thing. All right. God bless. Take care. Until next video.